extensively over the years. And so Steve is here from Iowa. If you have your amended schedule, you've got his bio there. You can find out what you want to know about him. And with that, we are going to get started. So please welcome Steve Campbell.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? We'll get rid of this because I'm just bumping it too many times. It is with a bit of a sad heart that I'm here today because of Gerald's situation. Happy to come, happy to fill in, to help Gerald, and hopefully I say a thing or two that might help you with your operation. I felt like I just went to Disneyland and rode a bunch of rides first thing on the last talk with that trip through the Rumen. I'll never think about a Rumen the same. I've got a few slides in here where I, in my farmer way, talk about how I think a Rumen works, and maybe Doc and I will talk about that afterwards. I was asked to speak about the bull and the cow and how to select the proper bull and cow and how to develop them. I'm just like you. I kind of had a cow, and you learn a thing or two, and you keep learning. Gerald is a good brother in the Lord, a friend, and a very good mentor, and so a lot of what I'm going to talk about came from Gerald, and then things I learned along the way. I don't need to read everything that's on these slides, but if we don't know to look for something, we just kind of gloss over it. So, just a minute. Uh-oh. Oh, wrong side. Okay. Kind of the ground rules for me. We all live in different places, so what works at my place may not work the same way at your place, but the concepts work everywhere. There's a lot more hair on the udder of a cow in Bismarck, North Dakota than there is on the udder of a cow at the Mexican border. I'm looking for a bald udder in both places for butter fat, but I'm going to allow quite a bit more hair to be on the functional udder further north we go. There are a lot of things that work, but for me, it's natural that work doesn't cost a lot of money or are very important. We can double or triple our stocking rate with the way that we raise our animals. Who in here has watched or heard Ian Mitchell Innes from South Africa speak? Very few, okay. Rather unique way of thinking about how to grow more grass. Dr. Lee Mansk, if I'm saying his last name right, from North Dakota. He's got some data about why Ian's philosophy works. Gabe Brown, we're pretty close to Gabe here in the middle part of the country, and the cover crop thing. Ray Archuleta talks the same sort of thing. And then supplements, but you can't supplement your way out of poor hay. You can't supplement your way out of poor grass either. And I'm going to have about 3 places in here to have question and answer. I don't want to go clear to the end and wait, because as we kind of end each one of these areas, I want to give you a chance to talk about, maybe clear up something. I'm going to make generalizations. In general, this is what happens. Everything else being equal, if we're looking about this part of a cow, well, you can find a cow that a lot of the rest of her is different, and that specific cow might not quite fit the rule, but everything else being equal, when I talk about this or this or this, it's either good or it's bad. And 150 years ago, we didn't have DNA, we didn't have ultrasound, we didn't have the agricultural university system. Those men, their sons, their granddads, you know, that all got passed down, and we've kind of lost a lot of these things that I want to talk about today. So in 2014, I was in southern Utah, and a professor from Arizona said that they were getting really good at predicting percent of body weight. Can everybody hear me? Is the microphone mic close enough? Is this okay. Anyway, depending on whether it was a dry cow, a yearling, a calf, we're getting good at predicting percent of body weight depending on whether it's total mixed ration, ensilage, baleage that we talked about earlier, dry hay. He said, what we can't tell you is what individuals in those groups are eating. Some animals are eating twice as much as others. Well, if the average is 3%, that means there's some cows that are only eating 2% of their body weight. And there are some that eat 4% of their body weight. So a big part of what I want to talk about today is how do we get that cow that eats 2% of her body weight instead of 4% of her body weight? We can run quite a few more cows. And then Anibal Domingo, I don't know if many of you read the Stockman Grass Farmer. He's been writing in there for quite a while. He's a researcher and a grass finisher from Argentina. He had found that the average beef cow in the U.S. digests 55% of what she ingests. Weston A. Price, we can only get about 50% of the nutrients that we eat out of what we eat. And during periods of stress, we need twice as much. Well, Anibal heard Gerald talk, and he went back and dug his data out, and he found there are some cows that digest 70% of what they eat, which means there are others that only digest 40% of what they eat. So I kind of liked this bull to use as an example here. The bull moves the whole herd. The cow is going to move her calf as influenced by that bull and her epigenetics. But one thing I liked about this bull, and it's a little bit, it looks like a little bit more of a pointed pole, but that post is right behind his head, which makes it look a little bit taller. But I was reading a book back a few winters ago, I don't know, 10 or so. The book was written in 1868 by a veterinarian named Hewitt, and he talked about this pointed pole and what it meant for butterfat and tender meat. The next spring, I was out. I'd already made my selections in the fall for what I was going to harvest that next year for beef. Next spring, I was out fencing, and I get into the 40-acre pasture that they're in, and pretty quick I've got an audience, so kind of stretching my back, and I'm like, a pointed pole, a pointed pole, a pointed pole. I didn't even know to look for that. I was looking at a cannon bone for fine bone, and I didn't know that this related. Well, as I walked through the barn yesterday, I saw a lot of pointed poles or very narrow ridges between the horns. They're the same thing. If it's a horned animal, a very narrow ridge between the horns instead of a wide ridge, a pointed pole, tender meat, butterfat. I kind of say that because I think Dexter's would make excellent grass-finished beef, which is how I kind of came at this. The fine bones are the best indicator of tender meat, but the next best indicator, and I'm getting into an area you didn't ask me to speak about, but I can't help myself, is the folds in the hide are telling you how loose that hide is. And if you've got a really loose hide, you've got butterfat and you've got tender meat, and they're tied together. You can't separate them. So I kind of tried to blow it up. I think I have a better picture of vertical folds that go further back in an animal. But this particular bull had down in the lower portion of his back cannon bone, which is what we can see in here, a fineness there that I think will show up later on in another slide. So what does the bull do? We've sold open cows and we've sold open cows, and we've sold open cows. When my mom and dad got married, Dad told Mom, well, you don't want to ask a man how many cows he's got. That's like asking him how much money you got in the bank. All you got to do is when you get there, count his bulls and multiply times 50, and you'll have a pretty accurate count of how many cows he's got. I mean, how many bulls do you own that can breed 50 cows? We do not average that today. So we've had quite a slip in our bulls. And we were talking earlier, and atrazine had come up, and atrazine is really tough on males, bulls and other species. There, in this book, Herd Bull Fertility, and there's a few copies over there. James Drayson, he measured, I don't know, I think 1,500 bulls from birth to death, and another 3,000 that he got one shot at. We only measure the circumference of the testicles. The length of the testicles is more important than their circumference. If we measured around this room times how tall the ceiling is, we'd have one number. But if this ceiling were twice as high, we'd have twice the volume in this room. There's 6 pages towards the back. Let me see if I can find it real quick. It's not popping out. That are kind of the most important, that say up until you get too far out of bounds on the circumference, the length, the length, the length. So we need to start taking, and this is a fertility thing for bulls. That's why I'm hammering that. Butter fat, I started to point out a few things. And if you don't know to look for it, you don't know whether you have it or not. Again, I just saw a lot of meat quality looking through the barns yesterday as I was walking through. So, 1 bull to 50 cows. It's pretty easy to figure out where the most important animal is as far as what's going to happen with your herd. And so he's the money in the bank. I like the way Stephanie yesterday talked about we need to look. If we're going to choose a bull, we need to not just look at his mother and his grandmother, but what's that whole family done? And then we've got a bull that looks like a bull. He's masculine. You can have bulls that don't have wide shoulders, lack libido, small testicles. They're not going to get 50 cows pregnant. They can get some cows pregnant. When you get one that really looks masculine and the rest of his family looks good, that's the one you're going to want to use for to get even better daughters. Wide shoulders on bulls, put wide rumps on cows. Wide rumps on cows, put wide shoulders on bulls. Fertility in the male is in the shoulders. Fertility in the female is in the rump. This is a graph at 7.5 to 9 months. Testicular size. You can know whether a bull is going to be optimal, tolerable, objectionable, undesirable, or unacceptable. Really, the top 3 are the only ones that you're going to even... Well, the top 2 are the only ones you're really going to think are you're going to improve your herd if you're working out of those. It's really hard to find a bull that is in the top 1% or the top classification. The scrotum is a thermoregulatory system, and if we're adding a bunch of insulation around the outside and a bunch of insulation, if you will, fat cells in this building. I mean, it would be really hard for Henry Ford to build cars in here if there was a column in here just 10 feet apart on a grid. We've got a big opening in here right now. In the heat, the bull's got to be able to lower that scrotum down and keep the testicles down at about a 98.6 degrees. The body's 101.5. I got a nod, yes. Anyway, maybe I'm a little gun-shy, though. But if we're feeding grain, we will get fewer sperm cells and we'll get more abnorms. Primary abnorms are genetic. Secondary abnorms, and that's where that'll really go up, are from the they're epigenetic. They're the environment. They're where you're feeding. You can take a young bull and push the testicles up, band off the bottom of the scrotum, and never breed a cow because he can never make a viable sperm cell. Okay, I beat that up enough. This is, Gerald and I kind of put this chart together based off of what was in Drayson's book here, and the big deal is if you measure length and circumference and multiply them together at each age category in there, and I think that you're going to have this video, so you'll have all these numbers. It'll tell you which classification, even at 7.5 months of age, you can start to know whether a bull is going to be getting a lot of your cows pregnant. Dr. Richard Sackey, West Virginia, he did quite a bit of work. They took 4 bulls, got semen out of all of them, stirred it all up, and then sucked it up and bred it 100 cows. And 75% of all the calves were out of one bull, even though they got semen from all 4 of those cows. Well, it was the most masculine bull and the most perfect sperm cells. It takes the one that fertilizes the egg, but the others are, I think his term were accessory. And it's like it's helped maintaining a pregnancy. Some of his other research showed that at day 3 you had I'm pulling numbers out of the air because I don't remember them exactly, but it was like 90% pregnant. By day 30 you were down to about 60% because the quality of the sperm cells was not high enough to maintain the pregnancy. And in Drayson's book again, he just drew a perfect set of testicles, kind of like a football. The epididymis, I think, here we go. The epididymis right here on the bottom. It's kind of like the size of a half of a walnut. They need to be right on the bottom and right on the inside. If they're anywhere else, it's like putting an S-curve in the road. You can't get things out. It's an imperfection. All right. And so we think we have a bull with pretty nice sized testicles, but there are other breeds that do better than we do. Anyway, these are a number of pictures of, let me see if the pointer will work for me here. Well, right here where the pointer is, there's a big V right in the bottom of that set, and then the deep creases. And I believe that set is the middle one on the top when they tried to push them down. It's hard for the bull to lower his testicles enough when you have a scrotum with deep creases like this. And it'll actually be uncomfortable. They'll start moving around when you're trying to measure them because of those creases. Straight up here, the prepuce there, where his penis comes out, that all needs to be further up. I mean, here is the actual belly of this bull. So the farther down that is, that's an abnormality. We want that as tidy as we can have. The one just above here is hypoplasia. The left testicle is sucked way up and much smaller than the right. This one in the middle on the bottom, that suspensory ligament is probably 2.5 times as high or as low as it should be. It probably should end, too much. It probably should end right about there. And then he has a bit of a V. The one on the right over here is more hypoplasia. These, the top right-hand corner, and these are all in that book and other pictures. I mean, the same kind of, well, here we've got the same problem with the dewlap, if you will, and his prepuce down lower. And then these are kind of a banana-shaped testicle. All of those abnormalities, even if you have the right size, the shape is telling you there's a problem. If you've ever got hair standing up on the pole of a bull, it's a period of lower fertility. A lot of people, if we're feeding that poor hay in the winter, we'll get that period of infertility. We get out onto green grass. How many in here, well, I'm asking a question, but we're looking at all over the country, so Texas is going to answer yes probably, but How many people in here, no, don't do that. If you're, I don't want to pick on anybody. If you're calving in January, you're calving on in the majority of the country, you're calving on the worst feed of the year, stored forage usually. You want to be calving in, well, people say in sync with nature, but in nature, 20-30% of the animals die, so they come out of winter in a much lower condition than our cows do. We feed them enough to keep them alive. I suggest that calving in sync with nature for us, because we've cheated, is about a month before the deer are having their offspring in your area. Well, in the winter, the Aleutian Islands and the cattle were let run free, run feral for about 30 years. How many have seen the pictures of those cattle? One or two hands. Anyway, they were just a bunch of little short bricks with little broken off toothpick legs, like what I'm looking at in the barn in a number of instances out here. Basically, if you were there at the end of the winter, I would imagine all of those bulls would have had hair standing up on their forehead. Sorry about that. Because it was a period of infertility. They hadn't had hardly anything to eat for about 3 months. Well, it takes 120 days to change out all the red blood cells in our body, so that's the minimum amount of time on the perfect nutrition to produce semen up to the quality that they can. So there was only a certain period of time that those cows could get pregnant. If they got pregnant a little bit too early, they were really easy keeping. We'll go into that shape a little bit later. They couldn't eat enough, and they and their calf died. If they were too late, if they weren't fertile, those genes didn't get passed along. So that was a pretty dramatic in nature how things work. We really want on a bull real tight, coarse hair. Curly is even better. And then hair color. The darker the hair is on the front half and the bottom half of a bull, the more testosterone he's producing. Oops, did the wrong thing. Uh-oh. Okay. Help, Mr. Wizard. I'm dating myself. Present slide. You just can't teach an old farmer new tricks or something like that. So the darker hair on the bottom half, front half, is more testosterone. And what I really wanted to show from that previous slide, I showed bad examples, but the previews, you see how tight that is on this bull? That is really what we're looking for in that area. And I've got the little circle around there. So somebody was asking yesterday about a pop. Somebody was told that a bull calf would just pop out at you, and this bull calf here did, even before 6 months of age. But I think, as Stephanie did such a good job of explaining, does it come from an excellent family tree, or was it just the stars finally aligned on someone's farm, and we got this 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or whatever? So you need all of that information. It isn't just what you see. Now, you know your cattle better than anybody else. If I came to your place and we looked at your cattle for a day or two, all we're doing is I'm getting a snapshot. You're there looking at that movie all year, or for 20 years, or for however long you've been doing this. We've been speaking nicely about you, Stephanie, while you were not here. So the responsibility of a bull. Doctor, yesterday you were speculating that maybe leaving the calves on their mothers for 2 or 3 more months. You wanted to see how that was going to turn out. There's a story about that. But I don't know what fertility is like in Dexter's, but if the closer you breed, you tend to lose fertility. So one of the best ways to select for fertility is your replacement heifers. Only breed them for 30 days. They have their first calf, then you can breed for 45 or whatever. Rarely will a first calf heifer who has her calf in the third 21 days of the breeding season, well, calving season, ever have a calf that's born in the first 21 days of the calving season later on in life. So there's really no reason to save them, but if you'll really select for fertility if you'll only breed your replacement heifers for 30 days. I didn't see any bricks or salad or anything coming my way, so I guess that wasn't too bad. The first bull that I had that I thought really fit the bill, this number 2 billions, he had 2.1 billion sperm cells per cc. There, I think it's called a hystotometer. Anyway, in the book here, page 122, if you are raising bulls, there's just a few copies back there. If you want more, Gerald's got a number, and you can email him and get them from him. But I really highly suggest that page 122, the 2 pages just in front of, and the 2 pages just behind that, that is the meat and potatoes of what the testicles need to be to have bulls that can breed a lot of cows. I'm going to talk a little bit about linear measuring here in a little bit. This photo on the left, or a litho, or whatever you want to call it, is out of Jan Bonsma from South Africa, Man Must Measure, and he's talking about the gland system. There's another photo that isn't here, but it's about arrows even going both directions, trying to get a cow pregnant. I don't want to go into this too deep, but the first 3 months of pregnancy. So my favorite book for, about made a mistake, my favorite book for a lay person, I'm pointing at myself, about epigenetics is Pottinger's Prophecy. Pottinger's Cats. Who in here's read Pottinger's Cats? I tell way too many stories, so I'm going to get myself in trouble. Can you let me know, Kim, when I'm like 30 minutes to go or something? Okay. He was, I think it was San Francisco, might have been LA area back in the 30s, 40s, and they were doing adrenal supplementation. They were using cats to prove how strong these supplements were so they could get every pill the same, and they had them in 2 places. And one place was raw meat, raw milk. The other place was cooked meat and cooked milk. The cats, long story short, in 4 generations in the cooked side, and just think about how much more processed our food is today than only cooked. In 4 generations, they couldn't reproduce. And for every generation of this diet, sorry, I'm not pointing at you, every generation of this diet, it took 3 generations of this diet to get that health back. Well, I read another book, a better book on epigenetics called Epigenetic Revolution, but it's kind of a hard read, and I found this Waddington's Epigenetic Landscape in there. And so imagine if you do nothing, we've put the cattle inside of a fence, they're not buffalo and can go anywhere they want. If we do nothing, that ball is going to roll down the left side because they don't have access to all the things that they need. Well, there are places where we can, if we are smart about it, there are places where we can move that ball over to the right-hand side with just a little bit of effort. And if you'll notice the 3 spots here, the further you start in the process, the more you can move the ball over to the right-hand side of this landscape. Well, here it's a mineral-rich, toxin-free intrauterine environment, the fetal programming, what happens in the first 3 months of pregnancy. And it's actually what happens before the cow gets pregnant. And then down here we've got 2 more places to make a choice. And it's how many months are they when we wean. And that would be how well we develop the villi and the rumen. And then what are we feeding them at that time? Towards the end of lactation, there's a greater butterfat percent in the milk than there is early on. It's not that the butterfat went up, it's the volume of milk went down. So, closed herd, I think I heard someone use the term yesterday. If you are close to what you want, I think that's a good term, but it's a buzzword, like a lot of things. And it can be misused, line breeding, I don't know, there are others, don't come to mind right now. Well, what happened? Nothing happened. Well, I put some arrows in here, but they didn't show up. So this, the cow on the top left, good deep cow, nice udder. She's got a slight wedge. What do I mean by a wedge? That means that her belly is a little bit closer to the ground than her chest. There's no reason to have a cow any deeper than this cow right here. I can't tell in that photo whether her shoulder blades are below her backbone or not. It kind of looks like they are. I know on the top right, her shoulder blades and her backbone are even. Much more of a wedge, if you can all see that. Her belly is much bigger than the depth of her chest. Now, if I had to choose udders, I'd put the udder on the cow on the left, on the cow on the right to try to make her better. Similarly, the cow on the left has a little bit of a wedge, but the cow on the right has more. Of the 4 udders, I like the one on the right the very best because of the top left has a slight segment where the lower right doesn't, and it's a bald udder, more butterfat. I don't know how many more times. Oh, I know why I didn't have those, because I had the arrow in the wrong spot. Okay, sorry about that. Get past all that. These 2 cows, I didn't have them. I just took one of these little 3-sided rulers and measured. I linear measured off the photo this, and we're kind of getting ready to get into that a little bit. But the way they're put together will affect how easy keeping they are, which will affect how long they're going to last in your herd. It's not just easy keeping. We've got to have butterfat and maternal instincts as well. But what I'm trying to say here is the cow on the right is kind of what we have in general out west in the bigger ranches, because their offspring won't work in the feedlot, and so that's what they get paid top dollar for. But people worry about weaning the biggest calf. It's not profit per animal, it's profit per acre is what's more important. Uh-oh, did the wrong thing again. Okay, so if I could change the cow on the right, if she just had some wedge to her, that's what the dotted line's trying to indicate, she'd be a much more productive cow. I don't know that she's ever going to be pretty. There are people that want them productive and pretty. So some things about this top left is about a 5-month-old heifer. And you see that fat roll out in front of the udder going towards the belly there. That's just from mom's butterfat. Top right, a little bit of a tilt to that udder, but enough volume there. The lower left is the escutcheon. Who in here has heard about the escutcheon or ever read The Milch Cow by Francois Guinan? Wow, no hand. Oh, 2. Oh, good, great. Anyway, you can get reprinted copies of that, but it was a Frenchman back in the early 1800s. It took him about 30 years to figure it out. He was doing it with dairy, but this pattern on the back of a cow, which should look like a shovel, to be the top of his classifications, would tell you how early after she calved she would come into full milk production, how long she would stay in high production, and then the amount of milk she would give, the amount of fat, and the amount of protein. And I'm paraphrasing, I don't think it's on this one. The French government made a statement that sounded something like, if a person would follow the treaties as laid down by Francois Guinan, there need be no doubt. We're not talking expected progeny difference. The words were, there need be no doubt as to whether a heifer born on your farm would be a good milker, or if you went to someone's farm to buy a heifer, you could tell with certainty, not EPD, you could tell with certainty that she would be a good milker when you brought her home. That was the French government proclamation in 1848. He was the first person to get a lifetime pension from the French government because they thought that that was so valuable of information. Anyway, I find it pretty interesting. So, talking more about the cow now, I beat the cow up, or the bull up pretty good. Notice I have 300 days, 10 months. Leave the calf on for 10 months. I'll go ahead and tell the story. A friend that runs 1,000 cows on 250,000 acres on the Arizona Strip, which is the part of Arizona north of the Grand Canyon, but you can't get there unless you drive over into Nevada and up into Utah. He called me 4 years ago in August and said, normally I have to wean my first calf heifers at 3 to 4 months of age. I have to take their calf away so I can get them pregnant. They just can't maintain their body condition. He said, they're not losing body condition this year. And I said, well, Kelly, did you get a lot of rain? Did you change your mineral program? Da-da-da-da-da. Finally, I said, well, Kelly, how long did you leave those heifers on their mother? And there was silence on the phone for 10 or 15 seconds. He started laughing and he goes, that was the first year that I left them on for 10 months. He didn't, it got better after that, but you couldn't pay Kelly $100 a heifer to wean them before 10 months now, because for the next 10 or 12 years on his ranch, they were going to eat a whole lot less than their mothers ate. You can read this on the cow. It's her udder and her butter fat, and I was pointing out some butter fat things earlier on some of the other animals. The bull especially. Normally the quality has to come from the female. The bull is usually consistency and volume. Depending on how bad your females are, you might get a lot of quality from the bull side too, but everybody out west says, oh, I want that 100-pound cow because we know she's going to eat 3% of her body weight. Well, that's an average. If my right foot is in boiling water and my left foot is in a block of ice, I think I'm around 120 degrees average. Is that, I don't know if my math's right or not, but anyway, I'm looking for a shape of a cow and the butterfat and the glandular function, but I'm looking for a shape more than an absolute size, because I want that cow that's going to eat 2 or 2.5% of her body weight. I want that cow that's going to digest 65 or 70% of what she ingests rather than 40% of what she ingests. So how do we do that 2% cows? And for me, it's three things. It's a shape, it's looking for that butterfat, the glandular function, and then how long we leave that calf on the animal. This cow over here on the right was on an advertisement for sale at the Red Devon, and I'm like, I can't believe they would put a picture of a cow like this on a sale catalog, let alone let anybody take a picture. But this part of the cow is going to tell you how well she's going to take care of herself, how deep that is up front. This part back here is going to tell you whether she can eat enough for herself, eat enough for 2, but won't breed back, or eat enough for 3. She's got a good angle to those ribs sloping towards the back. I'll get to that in a bit. This every 2 inches of additional heart girth in Nebraska in the 90s. They measured 15 or 20,000 head of steers and heifers in a feedlot to figure out performance in the feedlot. And they learned a number of things, but one of them was that for each inch, the heart girth was bigger than the top line in the pole. It was 37 more pounds of red meat in the animal. They took 2 steers that were about 15 pounds apart live weight. One was a 2-inch minus heart girth, the other was a 2-inch plus heart girth. Killed them, put all the 2-inch plus heart girth meat on that table and all the 2-inch minus heart girth meat on this table. What's a regular grocery store here in the area? Dillon's. So in $1995 at Dillon's, there was 2-inch. Which one was 2-inch plus? Okay, there was $400 more meat on that table than there was on this table. So that was a difference of 4 inches. The other thing they found that was for each 2 inches increase, for each 2 inches increase in heart girth, it was 1 less pound of grain for each pound of gain. So not only by having that deeper animal did you get more meat, they ate less to put it on. A win-win. And I hate reading these things, so large flank, I'll get into this a little more tomorrow, but Ken Redmond, who knows more about linear measurement than anyone in the country, he wrote his thesis, and in there he had some graphs. Old cows. The 3 things they typically tend to have in common is the old cows, on average, have a bigger belly than the average cow in your herd. Old cows, on average, have a wider rump than the average cow in your herd, and there is more slope from hook to pins. The back end of the cow, instead of being flat or jumping up, it slopes down. There'll be some things tomorrow that talk about that. So Michael McDonald, he's died a couple of years ago, but fertility. The rump length, RL, versus rump width. The wider the back end of a cow is, that is the single best measurement for measuring fertility of a cow. Is it absolute? No. The only method that I've heard of on fertility is to breed cow or breed heifers for 30 days, let them have their calf, and then the number of days from when they calved until they came into heat for the first time. So if you had 100 bred yearling heifer, well, that'd be 2-year-old heifers when they calved, the one that came into heat from the day they calved the quickest would be your very most fertile cow, and then they would go down from there. Have either of you heard of a better way to judge fertility? I don't know how you would look at it. Bondsma, he could go look at a bunch of heifers and tell you this, but I mean, I just don't know of anybody alive that's that knowledgeable now. But 30% is how much are they going to eat? You remember the cow in the shade there, and I said she can't even eat enough for one, let alone to have one calf and not breed back, versus eating enough for 3. And then these bottom 2 kind of get hammered by the trade magazines and the feedlots and the retail people, because that's where they make their money. You make your money on a cow that has a calf every year and doesn't cost a lot to keep. I don't want to be here very long because this is kind of this afternoon. this, for every inch the shoulders are wider than the length of the rump. I think we have a yearling bull this afternoon to measure, Jeff. Well, I don't know where you're at, but anyway, maybe slightly older. This will be interesting. For each inch that the shoulders are wider than the length of the rump at a year of age, this came from Michael McDonald, it's 2.5 days less gestation. The calf's gaining about 2 pounds a day, 5 pounds. 2 inches would be 10 pounds, 3 inches would be 15 pounds. The most masculine bulls are the ones with the wide shoulders. So on the Aleutian Island, the most masculine bulls have been fighting. Fred's over there laying in the dirt, and the most masculine bull is breeding animals. Fred gets up, goes find somebody that the most masculine bull hasn't bred, and that calf goes full term, weighs too much, can't get out. His genes did not get passed along. But the most masculine bull, whose calf came out 15 pounds lighter, and then grew like gangbusters, gave us those little bricks with broken off toothpick legs. On a bull, the best measurement for fertility is how much wider his shoulders are than the length of his rump. On a cow, it's how much wider her rump is than its length. She has a wedge looking from the top. This is on the left side. And then, I guess it's on the left. Yeah. And then how much bigger her flank is than her girth. I don't want to wind up losing heart girth, but my opinion's changed over time. I was getting too thick animals, and I was losing productivity because they were taking better care of themselves than their daughters. So I don't. The heart girth is not quite as important to me as it used to be. This is a pretty good example. It's out of Bonsma's book, but it's a pretty good example of calving ease. I mean, I think we could all see that the one on the right, it's going to be much easier to have a calf. And if you measure from the top of the hook bone, be the left side, to the pin bone, you can see the angle of that pelvis versus the angle of this pelvis. So, an example in a cow, the one on the left versus the one on the right, and then the angle of the hook to pin and the hook to pin. Top line heart girth, this is going to be your best indicator of easy keeping. But we can take any of these measurements and go too far, and like I said earlier, I have seen that. But the cow on the left is 59% body, 41% air or leg, and the cow on the right is 63%. The larger that difference, between these, the better she's going to take care of herself. But we've got to have a big, did it come up? Yeah. We've got to have a big flank to be a productive cow. The one in front, if I could change her, would be to add some more wedge to her, but there's no need to have a cow any deeper than that. Tomorrow I'll kind of go into this a little bit more, but those toes pointing straight forward, width between the front legs. If every time I go down an inch closer to the ground with the chest, I gain 2 inches of heart girth. If I'm measuring around a U-shaped brisket instead of a V, we're adding more inches to the heart girth, easier keeping animal. I have the picture of this particular bull in here because, as you can see, his shoulder blades are slightly higher than his backbone. If you've got females whose backbone sticks up an inch, inch and a half, 2 inches above the shoulder blades, and you could find a bull like this in the Dexter breed, he could level that out in a hurry. And that's going to, the more the backbone sticks up, the harder doing the animal. The less the backbone sticks up, the easier keeping the animal. All right. Less of a height from the knees down, the better with the asterisks. We can take that too far. What I really want you to see are the last two sentences here. I used 10 or 15 years in the first and the 2 to 7. the reason I made the difference is if we've got 10-20% of our first calf heifers not rebreeding, that brings the average number of calves we're going to have on our farm down. If we've got cows and our epigenetics are wrong because they can't get enough out of what they're eating, they're going to go out because at some point they're going to come up open. So the better our cows are and the better we develop them, the longer they'll last in our herd. Anyway, things to look at here. See, this cow, as deep as she is, she's got fairly vertical ribs, but her backbone is sticking up above her shoulder blade. Even with that, the one on the bottom there, her backbone is even with her shoulder blades, which the one on the bottom is much more fertile cow than the one on the top. The one on the top, I'd like to go back. The one on the top is going to do a dandy job of taking care of herself, but not her calf. She's pretty, but she won't be productive. Okay, so just angle of the rib bones. The better body condition they're in, the harder it is to see the rib bones, but you can see the flank there when they're kind of hungry. I just drew this one arrow in between these two ribs. You can kind of see the angle of the ribs there. One thing I want to point out here, though, is this is what they call a copper bump. Buck Chastain, who was a follower of bondsman, you either did not have enough copper in your mineral or something in your environment was tying up that copper. When I got the last of everything from China out of the mineral going into my cattle, it's just all of these problems kind of melted away. But that's a different talk. This again is out of Bondsman's book. That is as deep a cow as you want, but you see she has the wedge. The earlier maturing an animal is, the long bone growth shuts off earlier in life. Early maturity would lead to more fertility, would lead to animals that will finish earlier in life, which leads to more tender meat. But it tends to stop first on the front end of a cow and the back end of a bull. And that's the only explanation I can come up with for why the back end of that bull is so much higher than the front end. Excuse me, that's a cow. The back end of that cow is so much higher than the front end. But it's in a book called Factors Affecting Calf Crop. And I think there are some people here from Florida. But if you buy that book, and if you can get your hands on it, it'll cost you $200. If you don't live in Florida, start at chapter 6. If you live in Florida, start at chapter 1. Best book I've ever read. It explains all of this stuff better than any other book I've ever found. So the heifer's not rebreeding. We've got to have a flank that's at least 2 inches bigger than the girth, and more is better. The girth needs to be equal to the top line. I'm kind of thinking that you get beyond about a +3 heart girth on a cow, and you've got to be really picky about fine bones, glandular function, butter fat, that sort of thing. You can get them too thick in a hurry and not have the qualities that are going to make him productive when you get beyond that point. The rump, 2.5 inches wider than it is long. The first 8.5-month-old heifer that I found whose rump was 5 inches wider than it was long. When she had her first calf at 2 years of age, I was coming back in from irrigating. I saw water was out. Went up to my office. I looked out. She laid down. She had her calf 7 minutes. Later on, I went out and weighed it, and it was 92 pounds, which was one of the biggest calves that I'd had that year. But she didn't have to stand up and turn 3 circles to the left and lay back down. She just laid down and had her calf. You know, we're kind of playing by all the rules. That's calving ease from the female side. Everybody wants a calving ease bull, and I've had 3 or 4 conversations about how I think Dexter's, now I'm really going off the reservation, how I think Dexter's would be a great bull to use on conventional cows for calving ease in their first calf heifers, But when you sell them that bull, you need to make an agreement with them that you get first pick of those offspring, because those half-dexters would make excellent gourmet grass-finished beef. They got what they wanted, and you paid them a little premium for half, three-quarters. It depends on how good their cows are. They're like, this is a win-win. I don't have to pull any calves, and they're going to pay me more for that first calf crop. And then if you only want to try this is kind of for people that are just in the commercial deal, why I have this bottom sentence on there. If you wanted to just stick your toe in the water of this, leaving the calves on for 10 months, try it with just your replacement heifers. Because they're the ones that are going to be around the longest. The bull typically isn't even around as long as a cow. But for you, if you're grass finishing, what I have found is that for each month, and I'm a small producer, so there's no data here other than what's here. For each month extra that I leave the calf on, the offspring are going to get fat on grass at least 2, if not 3 weeks earlier in life. So leaving them on for 10 months is about 2 months younger in life, simply by developing that rumen to its full extent. Cows that can eat enough for 3. Meat to bone ratio. If you're doing grass finish, your live to dead weight is never going to be the same ratio. You're always going to be behind the feedlot system, because our animals have to have a big belly to ruminate. And that one doesn't bother me. It's the hanging weight to the meat on the table. You remember $400 more? If you've got a 700-pound carcass, and it's a 50% meat to bone ratio, that's 350 pounds of meat. If it's a 60% meat to bone ratio, that's 420. If it's a 70, and I've had over 75, if it's a 70, that's 490 pounds of meat off the same carcass. That's a big deal. Linear measurement will help you figure that out. I kind of went through a bunch of stuff. I don't know where we're at on time. Are there questions kind of about where we've gone so far? Is anyone?
I've got a question.
Yes, sir.
A cow that would wean a calf at say 8 months, would that be a cow calf? You wouldn't care?
The cow herself is weaning the calf off at 8 months. That would be a cold cow for me. If you've got a cow, especially with this the proper shape, well, she's got a lot of butter fat. The handle on that discussion were tall and wide. She wouldn't be weaning her calf at 8. If you've got good cows in nature, somewhere between 4 to 6 weeks before she has her next calf, she'll naturally wean last year's model. But if I had a cow, and I've seen a bunch of cows that already had, their calf was already weaned at 8 months because they didn't have much milk and that handle was really short, so just as soon as they got pregnant, their milk production dropped way down, and basically the lifeline for the calf went away. And you look at that calf next to mom versus one that's still nursing at 9.5 months, and there is a big difference in those two. So I didn't have it on this slide, but the other thing on that, I think the last one that was there, on weaning day, and you guys don't have this problem, but out west they do, you sort the dinks off too. And you get all through and you've shipped and you've gone to the house and had lunch, and then you take a 2 or 3 hour nap. And then you go back out and there's 4 of you or there's 6 of you and you've got 12 in the dink pen. You let 6 out, you go out and follow them on your horse, and they find mom, and you just gather them and mom, and they go to town. Because it's just what you asked the question about. She's already weaned that calf. You know her milk doesn't last that long. You don't have to know the book. You just see it happen in nature. Other questions? Yes?
I had a first calf last year.
Read back, and then in December she lost her calf, took her to the vet. The vet said, well, you left her last calf on too long because she was trying to grow a baby. Did I kind of get that right?
Yeah, grown herself, grown her.
Okay.
Grown
Not picking on anybody, but if you're not getting your grass fats, and I come at this from that side because I got into the health benefits of omega-3s, the anti-inflammatory fats. Thank you, Weston Price. And so that's kind of how I'm geared. But just a second. If you can't get your grass fat on your grass, what you're doing until they're 30, 32, 34 months of age, you need to be calving at 3. Or excuse me, first calf at 3. If you can get your grass fat at 20, 22, 24 months of age, you can calve at 2. But what I do for that is I make my selection for replacement heifers. 30 days later, I pull them back out of the bull and cows, stick them back with the grass fat so I can get them fully developed so they can fill their fat cells before they have that first calf, because if they don't, they're always behind and they are trying to continue developing themselves, nurse the calf at their side and the one in utero. So that back to, can they eat enough for 3? She couldn't eat enough for 3. Was it your fault, without seeing the situation? Did I give you enough information to figure out the answer there, or do you want more?
No, I think probably that by losing her calf in December, I think she didn't have enough nutrition going into winter.
Well, she lost her calf. Others didn't. Was this last winter?
Yeah.
Okay, go back and look. Where are we at now? Go back and look about 2/3 of the way down the hoof and see if you've got a big ridge on the hoof. Did we have a big mineral event or something happen at about that time? And then do you see that across the herd, or was it only her? Did she get into something over here in the week? Did she get out and eat some kind of a poisonous plant or something? You could be a little Sherlock Holmes about it. But look at her hooves. And see if everybody had an event then, we changed to dry feed, store feed, or was it just her, or you can't find anything at all? All right. You're welcome. Other questions? Was that just a fly? Okay. Nutrient. Dick Diven. How many in here have ever read anything by Dick Diven? He had a website called Low Cost Cow Calf. He used to go around the country and do seminars. He's dead now, but I got pretty interested in what he was writing because it made a lot of sense. So one winter, luckily before he died, I went on his website, read every newsletter that he ever wrote, and I used my filter for what was important. And there's a Word document on this zip drive. Kim, Danny, I don't know if somebody wants it, you're welcome to it, but it's my highlights of what he had written. In there, he had the first 9 on here. In each one of these we can do a little bit more, but we have to have a little bit of additional energy reserves. So in that book, Factors Affecting Calf Crop, that I was talking about, if you had a cow that was in body condition score 6 when she calved, and one that was in a body condition score 4, and you fed this one good enough to get to a 5, and this one poor enough to get to a 5, at the time you put the bull in, you'll get a whole lot more of these pregnant than you will these pregnant. Losing body condition, gaining body condition. They both, everything you would think, well, when she was at body condition score 6, it will affect. So we have to have additional. We have to be gaining weight after we have a calf before we can get pregnant again. And then excess reserves. The one that he didn't put in there, and the one that I have seen and I've done to myself, is animals that get too fat to get pregnant. All the bad stuff. Pesticides, herbicides, antibiotics, toxins, and hormones. She gets bred by a bull. She's supposed to send progesterone back there to keep that corpus luteum going, and it gets gobbled up in her own fat. So she gets bred by a bull, She gets gobbled up in her own fat. She gets too fat to rebreed. Okay, kind of launching into something else here. Question? This book is out of Man Must Measure by this photo is out of the book, Man Must Measure by Bondsman. And I don't know if you can see, but there's arrows that are going both directions. But the pituitary, the pituitary and the testes and the ovaries are all developed at the same time, what they call pineal whorl. Temple Grandin, they did the study, how flighty an animal was, how docile an animal was. If you're pulling on that broccoli rubber band, you got long, tall cows, that's much more accurate where that is. When you've got docile animals, when you get nice relaxed shape like you folks have, that it does not make as much of a difference. But if you see an abnormality here, you see these parts, that is a problem in the reproductive tract. So when you're looking at your animals and you see that, you really don't want to be keeping that animal for anything but beef. So how are we going to see fertility, butterfat, glandular function? I guess that's kind of what I'm launching into right now. The definition of a hair whorl that I looked up. I have some circles on these different animals. The cow on the bottom, to me, was interesting. Let me get this pointer here. The little circle here on the bottom of her. Oops. Okay, so the big one here, the big one up on top. I'm going to lay the mic down and go do something here. Sorry, I'll try to talk loud. The hair coming down and the hair coming up, they meet kind of in a wave, all right? It's from here all the way along. That's the pancreatic hair whorl. About 4 months after a cow gets pregnant, that'll start moving from that little area there in the middle up into the armpit, back into the flank, and up the side of the cow. This is cheating because this was the biggest pancreatic hair whorl I had ever seen, and so I took a picture of it. A lot of times they'll only be maybe the height of the top of the small circle and from the armpit back into the flank. Well, I'll just go on because I think I get to them. This next one is just some cows that top is Akaushi down in Texas. You can see your pancreatic. This other one's a Red Angus in Texas. The Red Angus has a pointed pole, if you'll notice, kind of like that black Dexter bull. Again, back to that bull, but this is a much better pineal whorl on that black cow than on the red bull above her. High folds, adrenal hair, or adrenal whorl, and pointed pole. There were two Russian women were looking for a milk cow. Gerald happened to be at this farm when they were there, and they were parading different cows in front of these two women, and no, I don't want that one. Yeah, I want this one. And Gerald's like, so what was different about this cow versus the others? And they said, well, this adrenal hair whorl was in the shoulder blade area or further forward. It was in the front of the shoulders. The other cows it had all been behind, and they were adamant that it had to be in front of the shoulders. Well, Gerald at the time, had that ultrasound he was running around with, and what he found was, as he was ultrasounding animals, there was more butterfat in those that had the adrenal hair whorl in front of the shoulder blades than those that had it behind. Similar to a pointed pole, the shape of the cannon bone, the extra teats, the bald udder, the shape of the top of the spade on the escutcheon. That adrenal is, I don't want to turn that upside down, kind of like this. The hair's going 360 degrees. Right down the backbone, there's one spot on almost every cow. The further forward, the better. want to leave you with the further forward, the better. Did everybody get the pointed pole idea? The cow here in the foreground? Okay. And then these folds in the side. I've been going to a place in New York for about 4 years, and I couldn't get them to sweeten up this Redmond conditioner. It's a Montmorillonite bentonite clay, but it's very effective at pulling toxins. Well, they were feeding baleage, and I said, well, you got 70 cows out there, put 280 ounces of this clay on there. I want 4 ounces a day going in. Came back in about 2.5 months, and I saw these happy lines. Oops, wait a minute. I haven't done the right thing. I saw the happy lines. It's kind of in between that guy's fingers. It's like a welt sticking out across the ribs. They're running mostly parallel to the ground. Typically, the animal's got to be around 2 or more, body conditions of 5 or more, and then well mineralized, lack of toxins. I hadn't seen them on that farm before. In the first 4 years, half the animals had them. 2.5 months later, I hadn't seen them at every organic farm. I'd only seen them at some before that. Of all the supplements that I that's the closest thing to a panacea I've ever found with cattle, is this detoxifying clay. Because we have dirtied up our environment, and they have to live inside the fence we've put them in. You remember the Waddington's epigenetic landscape, and we're going to go down the left side of that clean, mineral-rich interuterine environment. This conditioner really works to make that happen. And then, did we have the picture of the two? I got to go back. 2 adrenal hair whorls? Yeah, so the head on this animal is to your left. I've only had 2 cows with 2 adrenal hair whorls that both gave me twins. Don't bet any money on that horse, because that's too small of a subset. But always use the one furthest forward. That one's the one that's telling you about the amount of butterfat in the cow. So all of these things are related to each other. The more butterfat a cow has, the better her glandular function, the more likely she is to get pregnant. Again, there's no way to go out and look at 100 heifers and say, that's the most fertile heifer and that's the least fertile heifer. But at least you can sort them into groups and say, this third are going to more likely to get bred, and these might get bred, probably can't have a calf, and then you just don't want to pass this along. So the thymus, I wish I could recognize the young lady that's here, that was out shearing her heifer when we walked through there yesterday, Danny. And just as I got there, she'd been shearing up, and she turned her shears and started going down. And I said, so why did you turn your shears the other way? And she said, well, the hair grows the other way there. And I said, you're right, it does. Do you know why? No. And I said, that's the thymus gland. If you were going to look at one gland, well, no. The first gland to look at on the animal is the hide. How shiny, how slicked off, how early in life. Bondsman. He knew all this and more. And he said if he only had one thing that he could use to decide which animal he wanted to eat for the year, it would be the one that shed its hair coat the earliest in the spring, because the glandular system of that animal was the highest, so that would be the healthiest meat for him to eat. Anyway, the bigger that thymus gland, the healthier the glandular system is, and that can be fed in and out. We can have it better or worse. The harder it is, it's harder to read in the winter. Under-mineralized or no-mineral cattle are harder to read because their hair's going every which direction. The first thing I want is a uniform hair coat, but once you've got that, this is kind of the biggest indicator. Anyway, it was kind of fun to walk up there, and hopefully she'll remember that down the road someplace. Okay, this U-shaped brisket, I was talking about how to measure heart girth. A U-shaped brisket is going to measure bigger than a V-shape down there. This cannon bone, second time I was ever with Gerald, Charles Walters from Acres had called him, and he must have said, "What are you doing?" And Gerald said, "Well, I'm standing here looking over the fence at Miss America." And it was a half Dexter, half Black Angus cow, and I had to go back a year later to see what this cannonbone deal was. I saw the rest of the cow. Man, oh man, did I study that cow. But I had to go back and about 100 miles out of my way to see about that. And then this discussion, that was the Frenchman, and this spade on this heifer calf here, it kind of looks like a Doberman Pinscher's ears. I've never seen that one, the spade better, that didn't have a it had a tall but a very narrow handle. Anyway, someone had asked me about the cannonbone, what it should be shaped like, and I didn't have the picture I wanted to send him, so I tried to use the keyboard to get across the concept of what I was looking for. And just below the knee, and a knee kind of like a deer or a goat, you know, a very small knee, but you want it to get just as small as it can be, short in length, and then ever so slowly widen out just to the width of the hoof. We don't want the middle one where it goes down straight and widens out. That's not going to be a bad piece of meat, but the one on the left is the better piece of meat, and it's more butterfat. The one on the right, if you notice, I spaced those parentheses of the knee out a little wider, a big knee, and then its smallest point is about halfway down. It's those inverted parentheses. And then if you notice what I did on the hoof there, I'm going to talk loud. If this is a toe and this is a toe, we would like them to be straightforward. The more there's a coffee cup holder there, the more they're going to tend to cross their toes later on in life. We would like them to be straightforward for a functional cow. And then this was just a half an hour. Oh, we're okay. Just don't tell many stories. Really soft hide. Okay, so this is back to the escutcheon and what it looks like. That is a really wide, really tall handle. This cow will come into milk production early and hang in there for a long time. There's a little bit left to be desired on her spade. There is that quote by the French government about Guinan. So, glandular function. In early shedding, cows and bulls that have fewer flies, their glandular system is better. They're excreting sebaceous fluid, which the flies don't like. They almost look oily. Maintain their body condition through the winter. More on this tomorrow. Doesn't come in. Are there any questions on that? I was trying to kind of get through it, and I'm glad I did because I got 30 minutes left. Any questions on that very subjective part of the talk? The linear measurement's real objective, but that's the subjective part. So, Annabelle again, 70% utilization. Don Faulkner. You can see a cow eating 3.5% of her body weight, weighing 1,035 pounds, and that bigger cow is actually eating less. So how do we make cows that only eat 2% or 2.5%? How do we make cows that digest 70%? And this is about leaving them on their mothers for a longer period of time. This next one, I wish that the top left corner, I wish I had thought about it before. That rumen had sat out there in the sun for about 30 minutes, and like, hey, I want to get a picture of this, and we cut it open, took a picture. I need to do that to get a more vibrant color to it. They shouldn't be that dull when you first harvest them, but you can kind of see the difference. This leppy calf on the right is probably, 4 months older than the calf in the middle, and I'll bet that calf in the middle up on the top weighs more than this little leppy calf. He got weaned really early. Well, the fellow there in Arizona weaning those calves at 3 to 4 months of age. So 1,125 went one way, they won't work. 275 maybe Next 2 days, we ultrasounded and linear measured those, and 50 of them fell out. And 3.5 months later, that 1,175, he warned him he hadn't started feeding them hay. He called Gerald up and said, I just sold 900 of those cows that you didn't like because I could see all they were going to do is cost me money the rest of their life. Now, I'm seeing a lot of thrifty, easy-keeping animals out here. So Kelly, he sent me the cartoon, which says, well, we got 2 breeds on this place. One that can winter herself, do without grass and water all summer and makes money. The other one we just tip our hat to and lose our shirts. So I did a little bit of math, 1,500 pounds of feed, depending on what % of their body weight. You can see basically you have twice as many animals. Well, duh, 2%, 4%, twice as many animals. And then selecting heifers the day they're born. They're at the udder where the teats are, or where the udder will be where the teats are. If there's a size of the palm of your hand, kind of a nappier, shorter colored, lighter colored hair, probably going to turn into a bald udder. If she's got 5 or 6 teats, more butter fat. You can see the outside shape of the escutcheon at that point. Where is the adrenal hair whorl? And then you kind of get an idea of what her shape is going to be looking at that calf more from the top than the side. They're always way too much leg the day they're born. Who in here's read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell? How many more minutes? Can I tell this story? Okay. So he and his wife were sitting at a hockey game in Canada, and he's watching the kids warm up. And she says, "Malcolm, have you looked at the program?" And he goes, "Yeah, it was nice." And she says, "No, have you looked at the program?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And she said, "All but one of these players out here for both teams was either born in January, February, or March." What I'm building here is why you want your replacement heifers to come out of the first 21 days of the calving season. Well, what the deal was in Canada, whether you were born on January 1st or December 31st. Whatever the date of the year was, you were a year old. Well, at 6 years of age, one kid was 6 years of age and the other one was 5 years and 1 day old. Well, those younger kids, as early as they started them on hockey in Canada, they were all more athletic. They got moved into the better teams, better coaches, more playing time. It was tremendously hard for a kid that was born later on. He had to be really, really good to ever become a professional hockey player. Well, similarly, like I said earlier, I don't know where the data to back it up is. Rarely will a heifer who has a calf in the third 21 days of the calving season ever have a calf in the first 21 days of the calving season later on in life. So we just selected for a 42 or an 84-pound smaller calf if we're going to go ahead and continue to use her. At weaning, we've selected for that smaller calf because it just has fewer days. At a year of age, 2, 4, 6, 8 inch plus girth, and then the rump, 2.5 inches wider or more. Develop them, leave them on their mother. Okay, so now back kind of to the epigenetic thing just a little bit here. My opinion, we've leached, we've irrigated, we've taken the minerals out of the soil, we've let them go down to the Mississippi. We have too few minerals in our ground, and we've got way too many toxins. And this Lugol's, the halide group is iodine, bromine, chlorine, and fluorine. If we've got enough iodine, we will excrete the other 3. Iodine prevents more cancer than any other mineral. Fluorine causes more cancer than any other mineral. And then the toxins. You think about people that are gluten intolerant, lactose intolerant, celiacs. What they're telling us is there's a problem with the way commercially we are growing wheat. the way we're growing milk in this country. Last year I'm probably picking on somebody, in Saskatchewan, 100% of the non-GMO wheat was sprayed with Roundup to dry it so they could get the combine in there and get it out before the weather changed. For every dollar you spend on supplements, why are we buying supplements? Because those things are no longer in our food, and the smart people are going, I need that, I'm going to go to the health food store. You save $40 over the rest of your life on pharmaceuticals. That's crazy payback. People say, oh, that's too expensive. It's at 5 times the cost. It's actually cheap. And the pain you don't have to go through with all that other stuff. And then, again, we can't supplement our way out of poor hay. I like the expression. The 3 things that I use a whole lot at home, and I'm happy to talk to anybody about, are the apple cider vinegar, the enzymes in raw apple cider vinegar. If it's not raw, there aren't enzymes. They've killed them. Pasteurized milk. In raw apple cider vinegar, whenever your feed is dry, really hot in the summer, standing, dry hay in the winter, the enzymes, you'll get 20 to 25% better utilization of that feed because the enzymes help break down that lignified grass. If you've got, I'm treading on thin ice, Doc. If you've got particles in the manure patty that are longer than 1/4 of an inch, you didn't get good room and function out of that animal. And you did say something in there, and I was going to raise my hand, but the more confused we keep the biology, if we're feeding them something this week and something that week and back and forth, the biology in the rumen never gets settled down. We need to keep them on a steady diet because I believe it's 21 days, change out all the biology for a new feed. So, and then I said earlier about the clay and the happy lines on those cows. And then I take sea salt and make a brine and have a second water source. If you can do this for the majority of the year, one thing you will find is your cattle will be consuming half to maybe 1/4 of the mineral they're currently consuming at a whole lot less cost. Can we read that? We can learn these things. 150 years ago, we were talking earlier about doing DNA on tenderness. But you can see tenderness in an animal. Cannon bones first, vertical folds in the hides, and the second one there are other things. We can learn to do all of these things. We just need to invest a little bit of time. And that's kind of what I had. I'll leave contact info. There's some business cards back there. There are a few books. I think the price is on them. The money goes to Gerald. Questions? We got a little bit of time?
How do you recommend feeding bentonite clay? Just mix it right in there?
How do I recommend? No, mixing it in the mineral. No, 2 things. One, it's kind of bitter, so all they'll do is slow down on mineral.
Okay.
You have to entice them. There in New York, I couldn't get them to put sugar, dried molasses, licorice or anise. So I said, just put it on that baleage, it'll stick, and then they'll consume it. Normally what you're going to have to do is add, well, if you start out with 1 bag of the conditioner and that's 50 pounds, and a 25-pound bag of sugar, in almost every case, they'll start eating it. And then you just keep varying the amount of sugar. You notice how my fingers came closer together. You're trying to get 4 ounces of the clay into the cow every day. If you're doing 1 and 1, that's 25 pounds and 50 pounds. They've got to eat 6 ounces of that mix to get 4 ounces of clay. If you could do that for 2 or 3 weeks, then you really only need to do it for 1 week a month after that. Obviously, I'm not a clay salesman for Redmond. And there are other sources. It's a calcium bentonite, a montmorillonite bentonite clay. I like the one from Redmond, Utah, but that's the close one to me, and I know that it works. I don't think I told this story. A guy called me up about 4 years ago. He had some registered low-line heifers, and when they go to walk, that they'd hit on their toe, and they'd almost toe over where they were going to go on the front of their hoof, and then at the last instant, they would go down with all this noise. And we talked about minerals and stuff for a while. And finally, I said, "Are you feeding any GMOs?" He goes, "Oh yeah, corn stalks and Roundup Ready alfalfa." I couldn't talk him out of the alfalfa. So I said, you need to feed 6 ounces of that clay per heifer per day until a month after the hay is gone, which was going to be about 3.5 months later. He called me up in 3 weeks and said, the symptoms are all gone. God gave us the antidote to Roundup. Did I get there? So you're just varying the amount of sugar. Get enough in there to get them interested. I've seen cattle at the beginning eat 2 pounds of conditioner in 1 day each. And it's like, wait a minute, let's stop and rethink, and they had to really back off on the sugar. But we didn't kill anything, everything just got healthier. We're trying to get them detoxed. Everybody got their bulls in now. Some people are getting ready to put them in the fall. The longer you can have them on that clay before you remember the Waddington's epigenetic landscape. The earlier we start this process, the better your calf crop. You've all got better genetics on your farm than you're seeing because your epigenetics are not good enough. And epigenetics-wise, even though the clay is more expensive, I think it's the best tool. And then the cheap deal is you're making kelp at 1/25th the price by using the brine. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Did I hear you correctly? You said that if they're born, your heifers have 14, that shows a higher butter fat?
The question was, did he hear me correctly? If there are more teats, does it show more butter fat? Yes, it does, and that came from Gerald by running around for 12 or 14 years with that ultrasound. He would hear these different things, like the replacement of the adrenal hair whorl. Well, the next time he went and looked, it's like, well, yeah, more butter fat, back of the cow, less butter fat. Same thing with those teats. The bald udder. I mean, if you want to go home with one thing, for butter fat, it would be a bald udder. That's the Cadillac. Okay, but you're right, more teats. Other questions? Yes.
Yep, I had one more question. So earlier when you were talking about being able to feed for 3, themselves, their calves, and their pregnancy, is that fair to judge a first calf heifer, one that's just had her very first calf? Because I've heard that, and I don't know, and this is my other question too, is it true that first calf heifers tend to have a harder time maintaining condition during that first calving season because they're teething? Because we typically, most of us breed to calve at 2, and they tend to teeth at that age. And then also because it's like a shock to their system. This is the first time they've, had to produce a calf, and so the second lactation, their second calf, they will do better typically, and so then maybe judge them on when they kick their calves off.
Okay. The question, I'm going to paraphrase, make sure I get this right. Typically, the answer is typically yes, the second, third, fourth calf is much easier on the cow than the first calf. Because if we didn't do our job right, she's still trying to develop herself, the one she's nursing, and now we're going to add, she's going to get pregnant again.
Right.
Okay? What you're asking me is, should I wean the calves off the first calf heifers so that we don't take anything away from neck? No.
Well, sort of. My question is, if that cow decides at 7 months, it's done. It kicks that calf off, and I can't make it continue to nurse.
Oh, okay.
So should I say, oh, that's a cull cow, and get rid of it because it was a first calf heifer, or should I wait till the second lactation and see how long she nurses that calf for, and if she kicks it off again at 7 months, just call it done?
The cow herself, the heifer herself,
Yeah.
the rebred
Yes.
heifer
Yes.
has kicked the calf off in 7 months.
Yes.
Okay. the way I think I handled what you're talking about was I was breeding to Red Devons. It's just the breed that I had chosen at the time. And so the calf was more important to me than mom. So in the winter, that's when I was getting to the 7 months, I'm watching mom and she's falling off in body condition. She can't produce enough milk for Junior. I'm like, take her and her calf and put them in with the grass fats. Give her feed 24 hours a day if she needs it. Help her do her job because her offspring were more important. Similarly, at home, I put those heifers in with the bull for 30 days, pull them back out, stick them with the grass fats. So now we're gaining everything they need to gain. I don't want to give too fat. Back to factors affecting calf crop. There's some great info in there. But then she has her calf, and her first calf, and we're getting ready for the second. If I have to pull her out because she's losing body condition at 6 or 7 months, and I'm worried about her kicking her calf off, then she gets a check mark as does this happen next year or not. But my way around it was I just gave them enough nutrition to get them developed. Losing teeth, I wanted to get as much done before that point as I could, but if I have to feed her excess, she gets a check mark because I had to feed her excess and those others I did not.
Okay. But you wouldn't call it on the first time? Maybe if it was
I would
a
not,
repeat.
but it depends on where you are in your program. If you're at your numbers, you certainly could. Okay. Okay. Other questions?
Are you getting a similarly colored cow that goes beyond 10 months?
Excuse me, she keeps nursing your calf for 11 months?
Yeah.
No. No, not at all. What I've gotten to at my place, with a few exceptions, is the day she has this year's calf, I take last year's calf and put it in with the grass fats, and I'm going to quit doing that. I kind of run these different little tests because I'm kind of holding those calves back. I really need to get them off of there at 10 months, and there's a whole creep feeding thing we can talk about, not grain grass. The calves can go out there through the winter, depends on your conditions, and they can get access to really good ADF, NDF spread that's low, so that it's very palatable for them. Whenever mom isn't eating, they can get all they want. Then I get the best of all the worlds. But if I get them off at 10 months and put them in with the grass fats, that would be better. I think I won't do that again next year, but I have for a couple of years. And what I have seen is by requiring them to, well, I'm just not going to do that any longer.
So I have one more because
Okay.
this comes up a lot on, well, at least in Facebook it does. The question is, when is it acceptable or dangerous to allow that calf to continue nursing and it's stealing potential colostrum from that cow for the calf that comes out after it? So like typically, I mean, we wean at I'll stop milking no more than 8 weeks before they calve. But if the calf comes along the day before they calve and dries them up, are they stealing colostrum that's meant for the calf that comes tomorrow?
The question is, if I'm leaving the calf on that long or out there with mom that long, is there a chance that this year's colostrum is going to get stolen by last year's calf? And there is the chance, but if you're weaning at 10 or 10 and a half months,
right.
No, there is no chance. And
but you said you would let that calf nurse till the day before she calves.
I have done that for the last 2 years, and I'm about to quit that.
Okay.
But I haven't had, that I know of, I haven't had the problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's a good question. Yes, sir.
You talked about mineral supplementation, you talked about the clay and the brine, but are you also feeding a commercial mineral mix in addition to that?
A commercial mineral mix. Am I feeding a commercial mineral mix along with that? Usually when I go someplace, if somebody isn't having big problems, I just say, stick with what you're doing, okay? If they're having big problems, we can talk about other things. But if you've got something that you're happy with, you're not getting much pink eye, foot rot, E. coli scours, that sort of thing, don't change it. But I would bet money if you can get the conditioner out there for 2 or 3 weeks and then just 1 week a month after that, get them detoxed and then just keep topping them off. And then however many, whatever the logistics are, maybe you're watering out of a creek and for half the year there's no way to have a second water source. A second water source. A second water source. We can't feed them straight right. Or maybe you live in North Dakota and for 5 months of the year it's just always frozen. When you can, when the logistics are right, the amount of mineral those cattle will consume is pretty crazy. So this is do I have 3 minutes? Okay. So this is a great, I think, Weston A. Price story. The common denominator in those 15 groups of people that Weston Price found was that they were all getting 5 to 10 times the amount of vitamins and minerals the average American was getting in the 1930s. And we don't get half of that today. It wasn't fat, protein, carbohydrate. Some were 30% fat, some were 80. The common denominator was the vitamins and minerals. A year ago, December 15th, Brandon, Nebraska weaned 750 calves. Weaned, stress. Put them in a feedlot, stress. Started feeding them his own corn silage, which was non-GMO, and prairie hay. Different feed than what they'd had. And it seemed like there was one more. Oh, and on Christmas Day, they got a 2-inch freezing rain. I'm telling my vet friend at a feedlot there in Idaho, and he says, I hear the wreck coming. Well, the other thing I hadn't told him at that point was they were mixing in 10 ounces of Kansas gray salt per calf per day. Somewhere between 5 and 10 times the salt they would normally ingest. And I called him on January 17th, and he had still not had one sick calf. You probably could get to 5 ounces of sea salt if you were mixing it 50-50 with sugar. The closest that I can come. One of the things about making the brine is you're taking an old ocean floor, so it's excess minerals and imbalance of minerals. That salt is 90+% sodium chloride. When you make that brine, you're getting 3.5% sodium chloride, and then those other 90 minerals in nature's balance. And that comes the closest to what this guy did when he weaned his calves of anything that I've seen. Every place that's used it, and it's just a little bit hard to kind of get started, and we could talk about that. On here, there's a little short PowerPoint about making brine. Anyway, it doesn't cost a lot of money. You'll save a lot of money on mineral. Don't take your mineral away, but if you will use the clay to detox and the brine to get the minerals in, your cattle will perform better than they have been. And we all have better genetics than we're seeing because our epigenetics are not good enough. More questions? Thank you very much. I appreciate the time.